Hey guys, it's Coach Powell. Since we didn't get to take our March 31st ACT, many of you I know are going to take the test in June or maybe September, and so I wanted to give you some tips, some hints, some information about the test that could possibly help to raise your score. Okay, so even though your grades are written in stone, even though you may have not so great high school GPA, the ACT is going to make a huge difference. You can have a low GPA and have a super high ACT score and still get into the college of your choice. The opposite is not true. So if you have a 4.0 GPA but a super low ACT score, you're probably not going to get into the college of your choice. The reason for that is because your high school GPA is used to predict your college GPA. And the reason for that is because not all high schools are the same. Not all curriculums are the same or teachers are the same. So all your high school GPA does is say that you're going to do whatever it takes to get an A in whatever class. So it shows your work ethic and your responsibility, which is excellent. But the ACT is going to show it's the greatest predictor of whether or not you're going to get a college degree. And the reason for that is because it's one of the only universal screeners. So whether you're going to Harvard or UT, no matter where you're going to school, the ACT is a universal predictor of your academic achievements. So obviously the higher the score, the more likely you are to complete a college degree. If you don't have a 21 cumulative or higher, you could possibly have to take a remedial reading and or math class at your university. And in fact, more than 50% of high school graduates end up in a remedial math or reading course because of their ACT scores. This is just an overview of the 5 sections of the ACT. You'll start with English and math, which are the longest 2 sections. Then you'll have a 10-minute break, and then you will do reading and science reasoning, followed by the writing section. At our state mandated test that we will take at school, the writing section is not included. However, if you go to any testing center to take the test on your own, the writing section is an option. My opinion is I recommend that you do complete the writing section because it may give you the edge on somebody who chose not to complete it, or if you're a good writer, that score could also be something that pushes you up to be selected to be admitted into a university. Okay, as far as the test overall, there are 216 total questions. It will take 3 hours and 25 minutes to complete. You'll get a 10-minute break in between the first 2 sections and the last 3 sections, where you can get a drink, eat a snack, go to the restroom, those kinds of things. To the testing site, you need to make sure that you have pencils. Photo ID is required, a snack and or a drink, and then an appropriate calculator. Okay, scoring. You're going to get 1 point for every answer that you get right. You're going to get 0 points for every answer that you leave blank, and you're going to get 0 points for wrong answers. So it's super important that you don't leave any answers blank. Okay, so what you should do is answer all the ones you can, and then when your test proctor says you have 5 minutes remaining, go ahead and go to the first unanswered question that you have and mark the same answer for all of the remaining questions in that section. It's called pick it and stick it, okay? So if you have 10 questions left, you go through and mark all C or all B, and then you go back to the first one that you guessed on and try to answer them correctly. The reason you want to pick the same letter is because statistically you're going to get more questions right if you pick the same letter than if you pick multiple letters. Okay, so before we get into the individual sections, I want to give you some overall test tips to keep in mind as you go through all the sections. The first one is this. Answer the easy questions or the questions you know first. You're allowed to write in your test booklet. So as you're going through, skip over questions that you may not know the answer to make sure that you answer all the questions that you do know. What you don't want to do is miss later questions on the ACT because you spent too much time on questions that you didn't know. You can write in the test booklet, so you can circle or star or mark questions that you skip so they're easy to go back and find. One of the biggest problems when you do this is that sometimes you will get off on your answer grid. So you want to make sure as you're skipping or as you're answering that you're continuing to match the question on the test up with the correct number on the answer sheet. Keep track of time. That's a big deal. You'll probably have a running clock on your computer screen. It may be on the wall in your classroom. You might have a watch on, but you want to make sure that you're keeping track of time. Oftentimes, if we come across a question that we don't understand, we may not realize that we spend 4 or 5 minutes on one question, and then we end up missing questions later because we didn't have time when we would have known the answer to those. Always be aware of obvious answers. You're probably going to have answer choices that are ridiculous or absurd, and you can eliminate those. But there also might be obvious answers, and sometimes those are there to trick you. So you want to make sure that you're plugging in answers or double or triple checking to make sure that you're not just picking what appears to be the obvious answer. You want to do these sections, minus the math, which we'll get to later. You want to do these in multiple passes, again, to make sure that you're not missing out on any questions that you do know the answer to. Okay, if you have no idea, you are bound to come across a question where you just have no idea what the answer is. There is no penalty for guessing, so you don't want to leave any answers on this test blank. Your first choice should be, of course, your POE or your process of elimination. You can often identify incorrect answers, so get rid of them. At least that will narrow it down so that you have a better chance of guessing the correct answer. You also want to use common sense. If you can get rid of answers, then get rid of them, okay? And like I said earlier, should you run out of time, or if you have no idea, your last option is to guess the same letter for the rest of the questions. Statistically, and this is important, if you randomly guess letters for 10 to 15 questions, you're only going to get 1 or 2 right. If you guess the same letter, B or C, on 10 to 15 questions, you're going to get 4 or 5 questions correct. This is a difference in 2 to 5 points in your overall score. So in any of these sections, if you get to a point where you have to guess, pick the same letter. So now we are going to get into the individual sections, beginning with English. The English portion is testing your grammar skills. The best way to answer a question in the English section correctly is to plug in the answers and then read the sentence in your head. Immediately, you're going to be able to eliminate 2 answers that just don't make any sense. After this, you're often going to be left with 2 answers that do make sense grammatically, and then the ACT is going to want you to pick the best answer. And most of the time, it's going to be the shortest or the clearest and most concise answer. You're going to have questions that ask you about the organization of words, the construction of a sentence, the right word choice, and then the other half is going to ask you like about punctuation, basic grammar skills, subject-verb agreement, pronoun antecedent agreement, those kinds of things. You're not going to need to know what those are. You're not going to need to define what an antecedent is, a pronoun, a verb, any of those things. You just need to be able to know how to make a correct sentence. And that can be done by reading it in your head, process of elimination, and just what makes the most sense. And remember, the ACT is often looking for the best answer, not necessarily the correct answer. You're going to have 5 different passages. Each one is going to have 15 questions, and they're going to be about a variety of things. It could be a story, it could be about a specific topic or anything. They're not going to have to do with anything that involves comprehending the passage for overall meaning or anything like that. It's just going to test the mechanical part of writing. So you are going to want to review these words because these are some of the most commonly misused and misspelled words on the ACT. For example, good and well, you feel good, but you play well. Affect and effect, you affect something with an A, that's a verb, and the result is the effect, which is an E. It's and its, the one with the apostrophe is not possessive, it's the contraction. If you see the apostrophe, it means it is. By contradiction, its without the apostrophe is possessive, like the dog lost its collar. Every day and every day, I see this misspelled on billboards, t-shirts, emails. 99% of the time, every day is 2 words. If something happens every day, it's 2 words. The only time every day is 1 word is when it's used as an adjective, like this is an everyday thing. Less and fewer, you use less when you can't measure it, like there is less excitement in the room. You use fewer when you can measure it. There are fewer people in this room. Principal and principal, I think we can all go back to the principal being your pal and remembering that one. Stationary and stationary, the first one with an A means not moving. The second one with an E is like writing letters on stationery. Who and whom is a big one. You're going to probably see that more than once. Who is followed by a verb. Who is she? Who are they? Who was there? Whom is followed by a noun. This is the person whom she disagrees with. Between and among, between involves 2 things. You sit between 2 people. Among is multiple. And then lie and lay. You lie yourself down and lay something else down. Okay, if you haven't listened to anything else I say, this is probably the most important slide for the English section, okay? And this is just statistically based on tests from 2014 to 2019, okay? Omit is not going to be one of your answer options in all the questions. But if you do see it there, you need to double check it. 50% of the time or more, if omit appears in your answer choices, it is the correct answer. Remember that the ACT is looking for the shortest and most concise answer, and so omit is taking out unnecessary words. So more often than not, that is the correct answer. If you see that as one of your answer choices, you need to go back and look again, okay? No change appears in every single question in the English section. 25% of the time, sometimes up to 27% of the time, that is the correct answer. So if you find yourself answering 10 or 12 questions and you haven't picked no change, you need to go back and check, because that means 1 out of every 4 questions, no change is the correct answer, okay? Remember that the ACT is not looking for the correct answer in the English section especially. It's looking for the best answer. Next, we're going to move into the reading section. There are 2 approaches that you can take to the reading section, and it depends on your personal level of difficulty and what you find to be easiest for you. There are 4 passages in the reading section: prose fiction, social studies, natural sciences, and humanities, and each one is going to count 25% of your overall score in reading. Okay, there are 2 different approaches that you can take to the reading section, and statistically, they are both, ones that can show good results or a high score. If you consider yourself a good reader, then take your chances by reading all 4 passages and answering the questions. If you consider yourself a moderate and or slower reader, you're going to want to do 3 of the 4 passages, and then on the 4th one, you're just going to pick a letter and stick with it for every single one of them. Now, you're going to rank these passages first. That's the easiest way to do the reading section. The passages can be ranked from easiest to hardest, and they're not going to go in that order on the test. So you're going to want to read the title or the first sentence or 2, and you'll easily be able to tell which ones are easier and which ones are harder. The easier ones are going to be like a story or something like that, where like prose fiction, whereas the harder ones might be science, or history or something like that. Okay, so once you pick the approach that you're going to take, the next thing you're going to do is tackle the questions. So many people ask, should you read the passages first? Should you read the questions first? Should you even read the whole passage? But there is a specific way to attack the reading section, whether you're going to do 3 passages or 4 passages, okay? Step 1 is to map the questions, okay? You're going to go through and look at the questions, and you're going to see that some of them say, in line 37, what does this word mean? It's going to say, what is the main idea? You know, what does lines 3 through 4 imply? Or what is the antonym for the word used in line 13? So if you find questions that tell you to look in a specific place, those are the ones you're going to do first, okay? You're going to step 2 is only to skim the passage. 75% of the questions can be answered by reading the introduction and conclusion only. Main idea, conclusions, opinions. So read the introduction and conclusion. That's it, okay? And then if you still have a couple questions left that you don't know the answer to, then you may go back and read the first and last sentence or skim the paragraphs in the middle. It's important to attack the reading section this way because you're going to get the most questions correct. So number 1, rank the passages. Number 2, map the questions. And then number 3 is going to be skimming the passages. Then the last step is going to be going back and possibly skimming the paragraphs in between for those final questions that you don't know the answer to. Because in this section you might skip around and you might do one passage before you do another one, again, we're going to go back to the overall test tips to make sure that you're matching up the correct question with the correct answer on the answer sheet. Okay. The reading section is going to ask questions that involve these 5 things. Main idea, which can be answered usually in the intro or conclusion. Details, those are questions that you can map. Tone, attitude, or inference, those might be a little bit harder where you may have to go back and look in the middle paragraphs, but still, you can usually tell the tone or the attitude of a passage at the very beginning. Vocabulary is a question that you map. What does this word mean in this sentence? And then negative or reverse questions, which one of these is not? Those are just ones that you're going to have to be able to make sure that you understand what the question is asking. And still, those are ones that usually can be answered in the intro or conclusion. Okay, here are some overall tips for the reading section. The first one is this is going to be one of the sections where it's okay to move around. You're going to move around, especially if you map the questions or you choose an easier passage to go first. You want to make sure that you're matching up on the answer sheet. You want to look for key words. But, although, however, despite, these are ones that are going to often imply contradicting statements where you're going to get definitions, explanations for specific questions. Don't spend too much time reading the passages. Remember, we're going to read the intro and conclusion, and we can answer most of them that way. Our last resort is going to go back and actually read all of the passage. You want to make sure that for the ones that have specific lines to look at, that you use the context around them. Sometimes the answer might not be in that exact sentence, but you want to use the sentence before and after, or the context clues, to figure out what the correct answer is. And again, always use your process of elimination. Some answer choices are obviously going to be ridiculous, and you're going to be able to narrow it down so that if you don't have an idea, you can narrow down your guesses to get the correct answer. So again, let's review what skimming is. If you're skimming a passage, you're reading the intro and you're reading the conclusion, and that's it. Should you have to go back to find an answer that you couldn't find by reading those two, skimming the paragraphs would involve reading the first and last sentence of each paragraph so that you know what they're about, and you can figure out which one would contain the answer to the question that you have left. Okay, the next section we're going to talk about is the science section. The science section is divided into 7 passages with 5 to 7 questions per passage. The passages should only take about 2 minutes to read. You should definitely skim the passages, okay? There are 3 types of passages: data representation, research summaries, and conflicting viewpoints. The conflicting viewpoints is going to have like the views of 2 different scientists or 2 different studies, and you're going to want to do that one last because that one's going to be the most difficult. What most people don't know about the science section is that 75 to 85% of the questions can be answered with the graphs alone and not even reading the passages. So that's why I say you absolutely want to look at the questions and map the questions first. Then you may go back and skim the intro or a few lines of the passage. Do not get bogged down with the passages in the science section. Those are almost there to confuse you, especially when you can use the graphs to answer most of the questions. So continuing with the science section, there is a reason that this section is called science reasoning and not science. It has very little to do with your knowledge about science, and it has mostly to do with your ability to read and answer the questions and interpret data. So relying on the visuals is huge. So when you first look at the graphs by a specific set of questions, before you even answer the questions, look to see what the graph is saying. Is the graph saying that if this happens, then this happens, or if you add this, then this happens? You want to write that down. Make notes on your test booklet to sort of interpret what the graphs are saying. If you can interpret the graphs, you're going to be able to answer the questions correctly. The wording in the passages is going to make it seem more difficult than really what it is. So you want to make sure that you're able to interpret the visuals. This will answer a majority of the questions. This section is more about your logic and logical reasoning than it is about science information at all. So if you can read the graphs, you're going to be fine. So when you're preparing for the science section, look at those graphs before you do anything else. See if you can interpret what they're saying and see how many questions you can ask by what you interpret before you ever even have to look at the passage. Then if you come across questions that you can't answer by the graphs, then you may go back and skim, but you definitely don't want to miss questions that are easily answered because you're spending too much time trying to interpret and or comprehend the passage. Next is the math section. The math section is the only one that you're going to want to do in multiple passes. And this is so that you don't miss any questions later in the test that you know how to do, depending on whether you're better at algebra or geometry. So in the first passage, you want to do all the questions that you know how to do without using your calculator, ones that you can do in your head, or you don't have to do any calculations at all. And then the second time through, you want to do questions that require maybe just one calculation on your calculator, or maybe you can still do it in your head, or it only requires 1 or 2 steps, and so on and so forth. So that maybe the fourth time through, you've got questions, the only ones that are left, ones that you don't know how to do, so you can either guess or plug in an answer, the answer choices, or eliminate the absurd ones to sort of get your best guess. And again, if you're starting to run out of time, you want to guess the same letter for all the remaining questions. There are some questions in the math section where you can just eliminate answers. It might ask you which odd number is whatever, and you look at your answer choices and one of them is even. And so you can immediately eliminate that. So make sure that you're looking for absurd answers as well. In addition to that, there are often diagrams in the math section that can also help you to answer the question. This is another section where you're going to do a lot of skipping around. So you want to make sure that you are on the right place on your answer sheet as well. If you have no idea in the math section, which I can relate, your last step is going to be to plug in each answer. This one is going to take a while, so you want this to be your last resort, but if you do get to some questions where you just absolutely have no idea, try plugging in the answer choices. Okay, last is the writing section. If you do choose to do this, your best bet to approach this section is to do it just like you were writing an essay in class. they're going to grade it as if it's a rough draft. If you had a few spelling errors or punctuation mistakes, you can still get a very high score and have some mistakes on there. So you're writing this as if it's a rough draft. You just want to make sure that you have all of the components for writing a good essay, a thesis statement, a hook statement, transitions, topic sentences, an introduction and a conclusion. You just want to make sure it has those pieces that a good essay has: a clear beginning, middle, and end. Okay, so overall, the most common mistakes on the ACT are found in these areas: exponents, common sense connections, decimal places, operation signs, political correctness, commonly misused and misspelled words, context, grammar, and the completed answer grid. So again, continue throughout all sections to make sure that the question you're on the test matches up to the question you're on your answer sheet. A lot of people run out of time on the ACT, or they feel pressured by time. So this is just giving you a little bit of an overview on what you should spend on each question. So for English, you don't want to spend more than 30 seconds on each question. For math, it's a minute. For reading, no more than 45 seconds. And for science, no more than 45 seconds. So if you find yourself spending more than a minute on any question on any section of the test, you need to skip it and come back to it. For any of the sections, you don't want to miss questions that you know the answer to because you spend time or too much time on questions that you don't know the answer to. Here are some things that you don't want to do. Don't lose focus or concentration. Don't panic over the time. Don't mess up your answers on your answer sheet. Don't rubberneck, like when you see an accident on the road, you want to stick your head out and look. That means don't worry about what other people are doing, if they're finished, if they're not finished, or where they are. Don't worry about previous sections. You can't go back to the math section if you don't feel like you did well on it. And now they have super scores, and pretty soon we're going to get to a point where you could do one section at a time. So just focus on the section you're on. Don't worry about the problems you don't understand. Again, that's wasted time. Okay, don't transfer information from problem to problem. When you answer one question, don't assume the next question has to do with that. Each question is one by itself. And don't forget to double check again that you're correctly marking them on your answer sheet. Okay, so let's do a recap, and if you don't do anything else, you need a copy of this slide to take with you because it tells you how to attack each section, okay? So first, for the English, you're going to plug in the answer choices. This allows you to eliminate ridiculous choices to narrow it down. You want to choose the clearest and most concise answer. More often than not on the ACT, the shortest answer is best. They don't want you to be wordy. And step 3 in the English section is to make sure that you take a look at omit and no change as possible answer choices. Omit is right more than 50% of the time when it appears in a question, and no change is correct at least 25% of the time, so 1 out of every 4 questions. For the math section is the one that you're going to do in multiple passes, okay? The first time through, you're going to do the ones that require no calculations and that you know the answers. The second time through, you're going to do the ones that require 1 or 2, just few calculations, and so on and so forth, so that when you go through the final time, you're left with 5 to 10 questions maybe out of the 60 that you may not understand or may not know how to do. And so when you get to those, you can either use the graphs or visuals, you can plug in the answer choices to see, or you can eliminate absurd choices. For the reading section, you're going to take one of 2 approaches. You're either going to make the decision that you want to read all 4, or you're going to read 3 and then guess on the 4th one. But regardless of which one you choose, the very first thing you need to do is rank the passages. They can be ranked from easiest to hardest, and they're not going to go in that order on the test. And by reading the title or the first few sentences, you can figure out which ones are the easiest. If you're going to do only 3, then you're going to take that 4th one that you deem the most difficult and just guess the same letter for all those questions. okay? But for the passages you are going to attempt to read and answer, you're going to do these steps. First is you're going to map the questions. You're going to go through and look to see which ones say, in line 27, what does this mean? Or what is the tone in the introduction? Or what is the overall theme? You can look at the specific places in the passage to answer those questions. Then you're going to skim the intro and conclusion. You can answer 75 to 85% of the questions by just looking at the intro and conclusion. And then for any questions that you have remaining after you do all of those steps, then you may go back and look at those paragraphs in the middle and maybe skim those, reading the first and last sentence to see if you can locate the answer to those remaining questions. Next is the science section. You want to make sure that you do the conflicting viewpoints last. Remember, that has two different studies or two different scientists' viewpoints because those are the most difficult. Remember that 75 to 80% or 85% of the science questions can be answered using the diagrams. So look at the graphs, figure out what they're saying. If you can figure out what the graphs are telling you, then you're going to be able to answer the majority of the questions. And then for the ones that are remaining, the 10 to 15, 20% of the questions that are remaining, then you may have to go back and skim the passages. They aren't long, but they are wordy. Remember that the science section is not about science. It's called science reasoning for a specific reason because it wants you to be logical. It's about your logical reasoning to figure out the answers to the questions. The last section is the writing section, and you're just going to approach this like you would write an essay in your English class. The 5-paragraph, 4-paragraph, 6-paragraph approach. You just want to make sure that you have the correct pieces, that you have a hook statement, that you have a thesis, that you have topic sentences and transitions, that you have a clear beginning, middle, and end, an introduction and a conclusion and body paragraphs. They're just looking for those pieces so that they can tell that you can put together organized thoughts. And then overall, you want to skip the questions in each section that you don't know, star them or circle them so that you know how to come back to them. Use the process of elimination. In almost every section, you're going to be able to eliminate ridiculous answers. And then whenever you guess in any of the sections, we're going to guess the same letter because statistically you're going to get more points that way. And last, just stay calm. It's going to be fine. And last but not least, best of luck to you. You're going to do great.